Mr. Green,
Uh,
how you doing? It's Joel
I'm
Shear.
well, Joel, how are you?
Okay, thank you. I'll switch to a gallery view so I get to see Bill Carr too.
Perfect, perfect.
How you doing, Joel?
I'll do the same.
Ken, how are
There you
you?
are. Hi, Bill.
How you doing? It's Joel Shear.
Well, Joel, how are you?
Good, thank you. I hear that voice in the background somewhere.
Perfect, perfect.
How you doing, Joel?
I'll do the same.
Good.
Ken, how are
There you
you?
are. Hi, Bill.
Hello.
See, with an iPad, I'm limited. Good, thank you. I hear that voice in the background somewhere.
Perfect, perfect.
I only get to see 4 people.
Ken, how are
There
you?
you are. Hi, Bill.
Hello.
See, with an iPad, I'm limited. Good, thank you. I hear that voice.
I only see 4 pictures up there myself.
Yeah, that's all the panelists who've logged in so far.
Okay, got you.
So
There also seemed to be a time delay.
that might be your internet connection. I'm not sure.
My connection's been in and out in the last couple hours.
Stephen, just a correction here. I can see my name on the screen. Green is with an E on the end, just for future reference. No big deal, but
I'll fix it.
I thought you
My
put me in.
apology. There you go.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
I'm going to blame spell correct
Should
on
have
that.
noted that on a email that I got, but thank you. I appreciate it. How are you doing, by the way?
Hanging in there.
Best
We're,
we can, right?
pardon?
As best we can.
Yeah, given everything happening and
Yeah. Yeah, not easy. Not easy. All right. That's something.
so everyone knows we are currently live streaming on YouTube. So that is up and available to the public as we speak.
Yes.
All right, there's Bill.
How you doing, Steve?
I'm well, and you?
So far, so good.
And this is, it looks like we have Chris joining us. He is an applicant. He will be part of the land development.
Tell me one more time here now. I'm looking at this screen, and how do I get the participants and the, what do you call it, on the right-hand side?
So if you move your cursor to the bottom below the video screens,
Yep.
you'll get a ribbon that pops up where you could click on participants. It says
There you
number.
go.
And
Yeah,
that'll-
with the iPad, you got to go to the top instead of the bottom.
Yeah, well, I don't have an iPad, so.
And you may well see me go black because at certain times I may just decide I'm tired of looking at myself. So I'll have the audio on.
You could turn the audio off as well, Joe.
No sleeping.
So again, we are recording live on YouTube right now, just so.
Okay. Is it unmuted?
Hello.
Hey, Ron.
Hey, Bill.
It worked.
Yeah,
You're good.
you can hear me, huh?
I can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, Steve.
Hey, Ron, how are you?
Okay.
Good.
So, Bill, are you up at the river? Have you been up to the river?
Was there twice today.
Yeah. Were you fishing?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet. Trying to learn how to run the rapids in my, so Seems to be the the focus.
You have one of those boats that doesn't take any draft?
Yep, it's a jet, with a jet
Yeah.
engine.
Yeah, the jet boat.
Runs on about 4 or 5 inches of water, but if you hit a rock, you still hit a rock. There's a
Wow.
lot of them there.
So how far can you go up with that?
I have yet to do it, but some of these guys, some of my neighbors, they go up to upstate New York.
No kidding.
Yeah, I don't go that far. I don't go anywhere near like anything like that.
Wow. That's
Yeah, I know. How about it?
That's a great run. I fish up there in the upper Delaware. I fish the Beaver Kill a
Okay.
lot. So we get the dams. The East Branch and the West Branch both have great water into the Delaware. Great cold water. So it's a good place. A lot of trout, a lot of native trout.
There was an article in the paper about 2 weeks ago talking about that the Delaware was like the #1 river
Uh,
come back of the whatever the
mhm.
last couple of years.
The upper Delaware is just amazing. I mean, you've got smallmouth up there, lots of trout, a lot of homegrown trout, wild trout, brownies, and of course you get the what's the one that comes early, the shad, they go up.
Yep.
And you get sea bass up there. I mean, it's amazing, very, very fertile. It's a great water. It's just a great fishery. It's, when the West Branch is colder water coming in, and because that's coming off a dam for New York. So you get a bottom release there, and you can go down. You can go down 1.5 miles from that release downstream, and the water's still cold. So you get because wild trout need cold water. They need it cold and moving and clean, and you still get a lot of wild trout. Big time. It's really amazing.
Every morning I wake up, I go out and there's like 2 guys, usually at about 5:30 in the morning, and they're just taking their time, just fishing right off
Yeah.
the edge of our jetty.
Yeah, they're probably fishing for smallmouth right now, I would think there. But yeah, Delaware's a great river.
So we're still waiting on a few people.
We don't have chat yet, right?
Not yet. Just for the benefit for the attendees so far, and everyone who is currently on, we are streaming live on YouTube.
There's shot.
There's shot. I do want to welcome everyone to our first Zoom Planning Commission meeting. A few items I wanted to bring up at the beginning. The meeting will function similarly to your usual in-person meeting. It'll follow the agenda at the direction of the chair. Again, the meeting's live streamed on YouTube. So if you're calling in, you could watch it on YouTube. There is a time delay with regard to that. The zoning amendment and saldo documents are available at the city website. On both homepages, there's a red bar at the top that has a link you could click on. It'll take you to all of the documents. The attendees have a Q&A feature at the bottom. Could be activated by moving your cursor to the bottom of the screen, clicking on the Q&A button. So those questions, please provide your name and address, and we'll address those at the point for public comment or input. Also, there's a raise hand button where attendees could raise their hand, and you'll be called on during those public input portions when we will allow your audio, and you'll have to provide your name and address. Attendees who are calling in, you must press *9 to raise your hand, and we'll follow the same process. Provide your name and address. Also, I think that wraps it up for me. Mr. Elliott, the floor is yours.
Oh, good. Thank you, Steve.
Stephen, I'm sorry, Stephen, did you want to just indicate how this has been advertised to the public? The ability to come in, just to put it on the record.
So this meeting was advertised online at least 5 days in advance. indicating how to access the website. It was also put on our social media pages. And this meeting was also in the Express Times and on Lehigh Valley Live at least 5 days in advance of the meeting.
Thank you.
Steve, thanks for those preliminary remarks. And I appreciate your comment, which I was going to echo, that to the extent that we can, we're going to try to conduct this meeting as we would normally conduct it. We'll run through the agenda, item by item as usual. When we reach a action item, either the reverse subdivision or the zoning ordinance amendments, we will, as we usually do, have the staff offer comments or a summary at the beginning. Then if we have an applicant for the reverse subdivision, we'll invite that applicant to make any additional comments or provide information that they would want. We'll entertain questions from the commission members at that point. Then after that, then we'd entertain any comments from the public. And then after we've received any comments, we'll have some discussion, and then we'll call for a vote as is customary. Because this is online, I may want to conduct the voting a little differently. Customarily, we collectively asked for the ayes and noes from commission members who are voting. I think to make it a little clear for the participants and members of the public, I think I'll be asking for a roll call vote for each action item. So I'll run down the names of each commissioner, and then each commissioner can indicate whether they vote yes or no on the motion as it is presented. Any questions from the commissioners about the process for this evening?
None from me.
Okay. One question, Mr. Narosky, are we waiting for any other participants that you know are going to be attending?
So with that, it looks like Commissioner Sun initially logged in as an attendee. He had just logged out and is going to try and log back in as a panelist. And Commissioner Kulik has not logged in yet. She did originally indicate that she was going to be present.
Oh, we have a quorum, Art, do we not? Yes.
Yes, we do. All right, and I know I had a little bit of difficulty as I had before, with the machine I was using. So I think what we'll do is just go ahead, and then as any other commissioner enters, they'll be able to join in at that point. So with that, Mr. Narosky, would you mind just taking a roll call vote so we have that clear on the record at this point?
Sure. One moment here. Okay. Bill Heilman,
Here.
Charles Elliott,
Here.
Dr. Green,
Here.
Bob Sun, Bill Carr,
Here.
Ron Shipman,
Here.
Jamie Kulik.
Okay, well, we do have 5, so that is a quorum. So we'll walk through the agenda. The agenda items for the benefit of the people who are listening include the review and approval of our minutes from our March 4th, 2020 meeting. Opportunity for privilege of the floor on any item that is not on our agenda. A lot consolidation, or as sometimes referred to, reverse subdivision for 132, 136 South 3rd Street. The proposed zoning and saldo amendments. Also, number 7 on the agenda is an Environmental Advisory Council update, which I will pass because the EAC has not met for the last 2 months because of the coronavirus pandemic. So with that, are there any changes to the agenda that the staff is aware of?
There is not.
All right, then with that, the agenda is approved. Next item is approval of our March 4th, 2020 meeting minutes. The only 2 items which I think are for which corrections are noted is to change the reference to the meeting date to March 4th, which was the actual meeting date. And then a correction of Dr. Green's name. I have no other corrections to make, and I just take a moment to thank the staff for the clarity and the comprehensiveness of that set of minutes. I have no other corrections or comments on it. Does anyone else have any proposed corrections to the minutes?
I don't.
Okay.
I do not.
Okay, I will note that Mr. Sun has now joined us and he is able to participate. So hearing no request for other corrections to the minutes, I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes as presented with just those two corrections noted.
I'll make that motion.
Second,
Been moved, it's been seconded, all in favor. I guess we should have a roll call vote again. I can run that down. Mr. Shipman,
Yes.
Mr. Heilman,
Yes.
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Mr. Sun,
Yes.
Ms. Kulik is absent, Dr. Green.
yes.
Okay, with that, the minutes for that meeting are approved. Next item on the agenda is the privilege of the floor. And by practice of the commission, we extend the privilege of the floor to any member of the public who wants to address the commission on a matter which is not on this evening's agenda. I've already indicated the items that are on the agenda. So is there any call in or online participant who would like to make comments or observations on anything that is not on this evening's agenda? If you have such comments, if you could please state your name and your residence address, and we'd be happy to hear what you have to say.
So again, if you're calling in by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. Or if you are watching through Zoom, you could click the raise hand button. Currently, there is one attendee with their hand raised, but as indicated in the Q&A panel, the question is with regard to the proposed zoning amendments. So,
Yeah, so is there anyone who wants to address the commission on something else other than what's on the agenda? If not, we do have a question presented, but that question relates to an agenda item which we will be happy to address at the time that that agenda item is before us for consideration. Hearing no other comments, let's move on to the lot consolidation for 132 and 136 South 3rd Street. I think as usual, we'll hear from the staff if the staff has a quick summary to present.
sure. All right, so the applicant, Heritage Riverview LP, has proposed a lot consolidation for two parcels that they own at 132 and 134 to 142 South 3rd Street. Currently, the 132 South 3rd Street lot is 4,399 square feet, and the 134 to 142 South 3rd Street lot is 22,198 square feet. With this lot consolidation, the proposed lot will be a total of 26,597 square feet. Currently on these lots is a commercial building, which is under construction to become a two-story commercial building. The properties are located in the downtown zoning district. The zoning administrator has determined no variances are required with this application. The applicant previously submitted a zoning application for the use and for the addition of a second story. So for the analysis, a location map is provided. The plans show boundary lines, lot bearings, distances, and total tract size. The plan is for a consolidated two parcels into one parcel. This proposal will create a parcel with a lot area of 26,597 square feet. Other than the lot consolidation, no other use is being proposed with this application. A note indicating the site is within a 100-year floodplain is on the plan. As for the subdivision and land development plan, a general plan requirements have been met. Again, a location map, primary control points, existing public improvements, existing utilities, zoning information within 300 feet of the site, a note concerning any existing or proposed easements, a note concerning any existing or future deed restrictions, and some certifications are included on the plan. Monument and markers, ground elevations, and the recorder of deed signature block shall be included on the plan. The applicant submitted the plan to the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission for review. The LVPC responded that this plan is consistent with future LV, the regional plan. The applicant's proposed reverse subdivision or lot consolidation would create one lot with a total area of 26,597 square feet, and it is generally consistent with the comprehensive plan and city codes. Therefore, staff advocates that the Planning Commission grant conditional final approval of the plan titled Heritage Riverview Lot Consolidation Plan.
Okay, thank you very much. I see some representatives here from Bouchard James. I don't know whether you're here for this application or whether there's another representative for this applicant present.
My name is John Tressler. We are here to represent the applicant. The applicant is also here. Chris Pector is here. One comment I have as the surveyor is that they ask that we place monuments and markers on the plan. Typically, these are put at the property corners, and we would have no problem doing that other than the building is being built to the corners of the property. So I'm not quite sure how to accomplish this. We could put some PKs in the sidewalk offset from the actual corners. We don't object to doing that. However, sometimes that creates a little bit of confusion if people don't know how they're referenced to the building. But we would either ask a waiver from that requirement or some direction as to how you would like us to meet that requirement.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Narowski, do you have any observations on this?
Mr. Tressler is correct. The property does fill to the corners. So I do appreciate his concern, and if the commission were willing to accept that waiver, I would support it. I think I don't see an issue with what Mr. Tressler is requesting.
Okay. Just an observation. What we could simply do then, we have a proposed resolution, so we could simply omit condition number 2 and just reorder the rest of those. So that may be one way to address that. I don't know that it's necessary for us to explicitly issue a waiver. I suppose it'd be cleaner if we did that. When it comes to that
Well,
point,
if I may interject, I would argue as a surveyor that the corners of the buildings are accepted as monuments in survey terminology. So if we could just agree that the corners of these buildings are in fact the monumentation for the corners, I don't know that we would need a waiver, and it would actually satisfy your resolution with that clarification.
mm-hmm. Again, any comment from the staff on that?
No, I certainly accept Mr. Tressler's comments.
So then, would it be possible to accommodate through a plan note?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that's a better form too. I like the idea that we know that that corner brick or whatever it is actually a monument at that point.
That's perfectly fine. I can do that.
Okay, so then, Mr. Tressler, if condition number 2 were reworded to say monuments and markers shall be noted on the plan, would that suffice?
Yes,
Okay.
that would be fine.
Okay.
Excuse me. I'm a little unfamiliar with that. Does that mean that there will be a marker on the building itself?
Now, what it will say is the building itself isn't, the corner of the building is in fact the corner of the property. I will craft language to that effect.
Gotcha. But there's no actual inscription on the building that makes that?
No,
Okay.
no, not typically.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, are you changing the wording in item 2 to say monuments and markers shall be noted? You're changing the word shown to noted?
Correct, because
Okay.
this discussion will be reflected in a plan note, in a sense, along with legends and other
Right.
material.
I just want to clarify the exact change in the language.
Yeah, thank you. It's not necessary, but does the applicant have anything else? I mean, I think this is a pretty straightforward lot consolidation request. You're welcome to add anything else if you want.
Nothing as the surveyor.
Why are you doing it? Why do we need a lot consolidation? I don't have any problem with it. I'm just curious.
I think we were requested to do it.
Well, so what you have here is a building that has traditionally covered 2 parcels. And now with the land development for the Hearst, this is the building where Hearst is going in.
Yes,
across
I know
from
the
City Hall.
building, yeah.
So this is to basically rectify one use essentially on one parcel instead of it crossing 2 without division, you know? Does that make sense?
A building can be built on 2 parcels, can it not? Without any further action by the board?
Well, if I recall correctly, the zoning code has language in the beginning about uses being contained to a lot.
Okay, all right.
I agree that you'd need this consolidation, and then any future subdivision would require subdivision approval. This essentially becomes a merger. I mean, in certain jurisdictions, just the fact that the same owner owns 2 contiguous lots would automatically be deemed a merger. We've never done that in the city, but to this development and even just for planning purposes, you would not want to have 2 separate lots. You would need variances because you wouldn't have you'd have dimensional problems.
Don't misunderstand me. I'm not quarreling with it. It seems much cleaner. I had not seen it before and I was curious, that's all. Okay.
Thank you very much.
With the change in the language noted by Mr. Sun, I would move that the proposed resolution offered to us by the staff approving the action,
Well,
the lot consolidation be approved.
thank you. We'll hold that motion until we have an opportunity for public comment.
We have people, correct.
I don't know whether there will be any, but, so let me invite it. Is there any member of the public who wants to address the commission on this lot consolidation application? I'm not hearing any. So we do have a motion made by Mr. Shipman to accept the resolution as, with that one small modification to condition number 2. Is there a second?
Just for clarification, Mr. Chairman, usually you ask for comments from commissioners. And
Yes.
Even though I asked for clarification, so I just want to interject, I have no comments. I don't know if any of the other commissioners.
Thank you. And I probably leapfrogged over that because in my own mind, I thought we were going to just do this. But you know, are there any other discussion from the commission?
I think for me,
Okay. All right. All right. So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
I'll second it.
Who got the
You can have
second?
it, no? No, you can have it.
Okay, Mr. Heilman, I guess. All right. So if you'll indulge me, I'll read out the names for the recorded vote. Mr. Shipman,
Yes.
Mr. Heilman,
Yes,
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Mr. Sun,
Yes,
Ms. Cooley is absent, Dr. Green,
Yes.
and my vote is also yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
You-
So nice to see each of you from Boucher and James.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we can move forward to the zoning and Sato amendments proposal. We'll hear whatever sort of additional comments or updates from the staff first. We'll entertain questions from the commission if the commission has any at that point. And then we will entertain comments from the members of the public. I'll just parenthetically note on this one that as I have probably for the last 2 meetings on this, that I am always reluctant to impose any time limits or to otherwise restrict opportunity for public comment on anything, but particularly something that is of as much public interest as this. But I would also, note again that we've been here reviewing this for a number of meetings. There have been some updates, which maybe require some additional focus. But to the extent that we can avoid repetitious comments or comments that have already been made in the past on issues where the text of the ordinance have not changed, I'd appreciate keeping those kinds of, at this point, redundant comments to a minimum, so we can focus on anything that's new and then proceed to take some action on this. With that, I'll be happy to ask the staff to offer whatever it wants to offer on this as it stands now.
Sure, just one moment. All right, so everyone is aware, I believe, after the last meeting where this was heard, we made some revisions, submitted them to LVPC, and received their comment back. So this is the final revision based on all of the feedback we had received through February. I could go over a couple of items. Bear with me here. And before we get too far, did all of the commissioners receive the email I sent before the meeting addressing one of your comments, Mr. Elliott?
I did receive it, and I'll just say that I've had an opportunity to glance at it, but not read it thoroughly. And I would just maybe just offer that because the version of the ordinance that is actually before us for review, these additional changes are welcome. I'm inclined to leave the comment in, that I made before in place. But then obviously you'll have an opportunity to advise either the public or city council that you made these, or you're suggesting these additional changes, which are intended to accommodate that comment.
Okay.
I'm just reluctant to formally take action with respect to those because they do post-date the date of the formal submission, if you will. And so I think my sense is that those changes will then be, I would anticipate, be presented to City Council with the idea that the staff would be able to say that here's a comment from the Planning Commission. The staff believes that we've addressed it, and here's the way we're proposing to address it.
Right, and my goal was to try and address your comment, not necessarily to remove what you had suggested.
Yeah, okay, and I understand that, and I appreciate it. I mean, I've looked quickly at the table, and it doesn't look unreasonable to me, but I just need some time to.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Okay.
Stephen, I just want to clarify, when you say the latest email, it is the one that has the table that the chairman referred to?
Yes, so.
I did receive that.
Okay. All right, so kind of going back, so we revised or chose to go down this path of revising the ordinance for three truly primary goals, which was renumbering to make the ordinance flexible and allow for future changes, to fit into the ordinance properly without numbering conflicts or section conflicts, which we've experienced over the years with amendments. As we've gone down that goal, we had found conflicts in different places, which seemed to be the majority of the markups we had made. So conflict resolution. And a number of the bulk standard and use changes we made were to reflect existing conditions of the city. So, and touching on a few other points, variances are not supposed to be commonplace when enforcing the zoning code. It's self-created hardships are not permitted as an excuse to get a variance. There are many variance applications that are submitted and often approved, which indicates our variance or our zoning code is not meeting the needs for the community, or is not reflective of what's being approved and actually built. As we've gone through it, the biggest sticking point seems to be context-sensitive design. And to that, I had issued a memo regarding this to kind of help understand where we're going with our work, and to get us, to help you and anyone to understand where we're going. So through our review, we found, the context-sensitive design standards section ostensibly provides 21 areas of applicability. Unfortunately, we believe as the practitioners that an early section 595-209A basically preempts almost every section, because it states, unless specified differently in any other part of this chapter, the specific requirements that follow shall apply throughout the city. So that first part, unless specified differently in any other part, it's in our current code, every neighborhood has almost, or every piece of design criteria that's listed. The big one that is not is building ornamentation, because that was never really included in a number of the neighborhoods. So that was always left up to the subjectivity that was included in 595-227. The other areas that we felt caused conflict is the regulations in context-sensitive design were very subjective, so they could vary, or the application of those sections could vary depending on the commissioners, if they change, how they felt about a project, or things like that. So that was basically the bulk of the issues here. I think we helped address many of those concerns by ensuring that those context-sensitive design standards were applied throughout the neighborhoods to make that the use of the code easier for the public, staff, and anyone else who looks at it, so that when they're looking at a zoning section or a zoning district, in that section, they could see everything that applies to that section. And then at the beginning, right before the district standards in 595-11D, we put in some language up front to help identify that we want to protect historical and other assets, natural assets, provide for or promote sustainability, reuse of buildings, and things like that. In your comments, I agree. We could change the language to make it a shall and more legally enforceable, but we certainly could discuss that throughout the meeting. And that is essentially what I have to present.
Okay.
Steve, let me ask a question about that. The city has received 2 separate letters from Lehigh Valley Planning Commission. One was dated January the 28th, 2020 from Peter Barnard, who was, as far as I can tell, the head of a committee that evaluated, looked at for the purpose of providing comments. And he noted that there would be probably a letter coming from the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission in its entirety. And that letter did in fact come and was dated January the 29th. If I read those letters correctly, I think they both supported having those context-sensitive design standards, all 21 of them. If I read the letters correctly, they preferred that those be in the ordinance, in series, and early in the ordinance was their thinking. So that a person turning to the ordinance for guidance would know right up front that those apply all over the city. Is it your intent, or at the present stage of the amendment, is it your intent to keep the context sensitive pages, the 2 pages that you prepared, which is, I don't have it in front of me, but has a table attached to it? Is it your intention to keep that in the front of the ordinance as they, I thought, expressed, as they would?
I do want to clarify a couple things. So that the LVPC did submit a subsequent letter after the second review was submitted, dated March 27th.
I don't have that. I don't have that letter.
Oh, okay. But I do want to state that the staff believes that we've moved the context-sensitive design requirements to each individual neighborhood. We attempted to make them objective so that they're clear and understandable of what the requirements are. And then before those standards, right before all the district design standards, we've included language that was intended to clarify the overarching intent of context-sensitive design.
So what you're telling me, I believe then, is that it's your intention, or you prefer to have the ordinance amended such that there will not be a place where these context-sensitive design standards are in series, presented in one place in a series. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
All right. Now, we had a public hearing on this matter where I thought that we had debated this, and it was the same meeting where we heard from a number of residents, and we heard from our representative, Mr. Freeman. And it seems to me that what the position that those folks took, our residents, and that Mr. Freeman took, are consistent with what they were saying to us in these 2 letters that I have. I haven't seen the 3rd letter. I guess what troubles me is it seems simple and straightforward to have them in one place, and it makes all our residents feel better, or at least the ones from which we've heard. It makes sense to me because I know if I pick that ordinance up, and God, it's 250 pages or 80 pages, whatever it is, and I can read that, and I know if I get back to page 250, I know that those things apply, and it's easy for me to page backward. I don't know why, and I thought you agreed with, because I asked you the question at the hearing, do you agree to have them in series? And I thought you said yes, that was fine. I don't understand why it's an issue, quite frankly.
Well,
it seems to me like a simple matter. It makes our residents happy. It would be easier to work with, and the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission supports it.
So having the standards themselves in order as written isn't, having context-sensitive design standards per se before the districts isn't the inherent problem here. So the problem essentially is the conflicts created by what is written in context-sensitive design. For example, one that sticks out like a sore thumb. We hear a lot that we are allegedly increasing the maximum impervious coverage in the River Corridor District. But the context-sensitive design standards specifically state the maximum lot and building coverage for the River Corridor District shall be 40%, which is exactly what we're putting in the code. But there's a conflict because the River Corridor section provides two measurements, and then the table provides the third, which matches context-sensitive design. So what we wanted to do was match all the design standards to each zoning district so that if there are changes, if there are amendments, it can be done within the district without creating conflicts.
So if I may comment, Stephen, first of all, you stated that your primary reason was to clean this up and reformat it, and I laud you for that effort. In fact, the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission came out and said that this was clear, something that was done, that the reformatting made it clearer and so forth and so on. Nevertheless, in that process, there were a lot of other things that crept in there and things that would have long-ranging impact for the city. And those were transmitted to you by residents, by planning commission members. A lot of it you've actually changed and taken out. There's still a couple of sticking points which are fairly major, which I think the chairman has highlighted in his proposed resolution. One of it is keeping the design standards intact as whole. And I don't see why, if where you're coming from is to clean up the formatting, you should be so resistant, because you've had numerous people, state representatives, people who were involved in drafting the original ordinance, planning commission members saying to you, we prefer to have those in there to guide the development of our city. Now, this city has run on that context for over a decade, and there were no major issues that I'm aware of, because I sat on the planning commission for almost 10 years. So it's not like there's this burning, blaring problem that's got to be solved. Certain cleaning up is great. Getting into each neighborhood and having tables, that's great. But like Mr. Shipman, I just don't understand the resistance unless there's another reason that you're not telling us.
So I do want to put, I believe this is the second time you had said that you've served on the board for the entire time that this has been the zoning ordinance, or roughly around those parts. And there hasn't been an issue. There hasn't been a lawsuit, so on and so forth. But when the commission and the zoning hearing board are essentially granting every special exception or variance or land development that's put before them, no one's going to complain. No one is going to sue until there is an aggrieved party. The fact of the matter is, there is a lot of subjectivity in context-sensitive design. There's not clear objective standards. So
Can I jump in quickly?
When you leave design standards to the subjectivity of the reviewer, that does open the city to potential litigation.
So Bill, I do want you to have a chance to make a comment, but I just want to clarify, because after you said your primary goal was formatting, there was a point when you stated you wanted to remove subjectivity by planning commission members, because certain members would have this view. Other
Can't hear you.
members would have that view. If you offer those views to talk it through, and most of the time we're reasonable, as you said, over the history instances, and nobody's complaining that I have to come in and spend time to evaluate these things. We do it all voluntary time. So
That was the point I was going to raise.
but nobody on the commission is telling you we've got to change this thing. So Bill, I'm sorry to cut in.
I agree I agree that subjectivity is a good thing to have in these situations. It seems to me, you just can't make a blanket objectivity that applies to the whole city when you have so many different neighborhoods and so many different situations to consider. It seems that subjectivity is what you want to have contained.
So I agree with you very much, because that's what the existing context-sensitive design tries to do, is provide a blanket statement for the whole city, which is why we wanted to put the design standards in each individual neighborhood. Further, zoning really does need to be subjective, and I'll tell you why. So there are 5 criteria to get a variance. You have to have unique physical circumstances or conditions. No possibility that the property can be developed in strict conformity to the zoning ordinance. Hardship cannot be created by the appellant. Not alter the essential character of the neighborhood, and will represent the minimum variance that will afford relief and will represent the least modification possible to a regulation and issue. So when you do not provide objective standards, you create a variance situation of subjectivity that is impossible to meet these 5 criteria. For example, you have Dutchtown Commons that had numerous variances required. Please explain to me how that could have been, how that lot was physically unique, that it couldn't be developed in conformance with the code.
Well, I can't explain that in particular. I'm just saying that overall, it seems unnecessary to change what has been working thus far fine.
What are you afraid is going to happen down the road? That we get a no, just let me finish. We get a very, we get a landowner who thinks he's being barred, for instance, and he thinks context sensitive design standards would allow him to do what he wants to do. Just assume that for a moment.
Mhm.
How is the result going to differ whether the context design standards are in series right up front in the ordinance, or if they're scattered in a way to be applied on a particular piece of property?
Well,
That's what
so
I don't understand. I guess I don't understand how that situation is going to be distinguished. We're going to face the same problem either way.
So the issue with that, that's not the issue. If we wanted to keep all 21 points in context sensitive design, it literally doesn't matter where they are in the code. Because as they're written, it's a blanket statement for the city, which is bad because we have 4 diverse neighborhoods.
Well, then do me a favor.
But the
put 'em up
true,
front. If it doesn't matter where they're written or how they're written.
but the true issue, sir, is that they are subjective and open the city to development that may comply with the dimensional standards. And someone will be able to argue that based on the subjectivity of it, it was denied and could appeal. Or alternatively, if the planning commission allows a project and they.
I'm sorry, that's my dog. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Hey, stop it. Hey. Oh, hey.
You just can't stop what nature allows. So maybe it's a segue for me to come in and say that I want to say that we ought to think about what the nature of context means in context sensitive standards. Is the context the neighborhood, or is the context the whole city? And it seems to me, I think our administrator is making a good point that the context is the different contexts of these neighborhoods, which we clearly are being developed in different ways, and the intent moving forward is for them to be developed in different ways. So the context ought to reflect the place where that's happening, not a more, I would agree, not a more subjective approach to the context of the entire city. So I just offer that as a lens through which we might think about this.
Thank you. That might sum up my response to you, Mr. Shipman. I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, I lost mine too. The dog took care of that.
But that was my intention. Thank you both very much.
I think the chairman wrote a fairly detailed description of a proposed resolution that could be passed if certain things were addressed. And I think, in those details, he goes into quite a bit about the substantial changes and the impact that would be occurring on the guys. This is just a formatting type of thing. And a lot of these areas are being done without a full professional planner thinking it through. And I concur with those things. I have concerns myself. I mean, when this was first drafted that language of context sensitive design was done by a group. There was a lot of thought applied to it, and it was applied to all the areas of the city. And I haven't really seen that to be a problem. If anything, you know, it's I think avoided a lot of issues where the city has just kind of gone whichever way it went, independent of its history. And to give you an example, one of the things that was pointed out in what the chairman did was, you know, one of the changes is to increase the footprint in downtown, and you're increasing from the 8,000 square feet, which the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission clearly stated in their letter that that is the bulk essentially of most of the footprint of buildings in the city, including downtown. And you're going to be now increasing it, double it to 16,000 square feet. But furthermore, you're saying that in the case where it's development, there's essentially, they can come back for a special exception and there's no outside limit. So, you know, what seems to be an innocent formatting change, let's get rid of the context design, put it in a specific place, is opening up the possibility that someone can come in and start tearing down a lot of buildings and say, this is an infill development, therefore I can build, my building foot size could be 30,000 square feet, 50,000 square feet. And these are the kind of ramifications from what you're proposing. And it's being proposed, I'm sure, from a lot of thought by you, and I'm not taking away from that, but I think that, you know, it needs to be done from people that can really look at all the ramifications, not that it's just easier for developers and I don't have to go through variances and so forth and so on. I think my experience of sitting on the planning commission is I think we're quite efficient. I think we're all very reasonable. Yes, we raise points that look at it from all different views. Some of it, you know, it's clear when I raise points, when I raise it, I don't really necessarily think that it's a predominating point, but training as an engineer, I want to raise it so everybody can see it, talk about it, look at it. And this is, I think, the strength of having a commission and having some subjectivity. I mean, if we were just creating problems all the time and nothing was getting approved and it just deteriorated into a lot of, you know, back and forth, then I could see, take out the subjectivity. But the subjectivity that you want to get rid of, to me, is the strength of what we have in the city, that you have individuals who are willing to volunteer their time, who come from lots of different perspectives, and who have invested in the city, both financially, time-wise, and everything else. Why try to get rid of that just because? So anyway, that was the point I wanted to make.
So I do sincerely appreciate every single volunteer who provides any time to the city. I certainly understand the amount of time and commitment that is required to serve on these boards. I've served on zoning hearing boards in other communities. I sincerely appreciate that and the work and effort that goes into it. But with that, so pointing to the 8,000 square foot limit, I'm sitting currently in a building that is well over 8,000 square feet, that has a view of a building that is 26,500 square feet, which has another government building behind it that is well over 8,000 square feet. There is a Social Security building over 8,000 square feet that if I had a window in front of me, I could see. The Perron development at 56 North 3rd Street was approved, which is over 8,000 square feet. The YMCA, former YMCA buildings, well over 8,000 square feet. And I could go on. There are
So all you're saying is that this can get done. You know, there was a decision made about, a lot of it was already torn down. I mean, the city hall is built, you know.
But the fact of the matter is that 8,000 square feet is a zoning code requirement, which needed a variance.
If I may just make an observation here, because I don't want to get the subjectivity of context sensitive design and the idea of special exception and variance. If you eliminate, if you went for 8,000 square feet with no special exception opening for larger buildings, then all those buildings Steve mentioned could not be done because there would be no basis to get a variance. So I mean, it's just something to keep in mind. And I only comment because the word subjectivity fits in well with context sensitive design. It does not fit in with the idea of, unless you keep open special exception as an alternative, which does allow for, I mean, special exception, it means you can do it unless it's a risk to health, safety, and welfare. But in a special exception, you can consider things like the comprehensive plan. There are all these considerations that will fit into it. So I'm just suggesting, if you're thinking of going to limit it to 8,000 square feet with no opening other than a variance, then by law, you're really limiting it to future developments of being
No, Joel, nobody wants to do that.
small.
Nobody wants to do that. Any of us that are raising this question about context sensitive, we don't want to do
No,
that. As a lawyer, I don't know. I don't understand your argument.
No, it's not an argument. I thought I heard a blending. I thought I heard a crossover between the zoning requirement and the context sensitive design. That's all I was just trying to caution the commissioners that there's different considerations. Ron, we're on the same page.
All right.
I was just afraid I heard.
You lost me. The dog really screwed things up, didn't he?
Well, it's just don't throw out special exceptions if you're going to limit the square footage within, and that's all I'm talking about. Keep your context sensitive design, but don't eliminate your ability to make decisions where buildings of the size like City Hall could be built, unless the determination of the Planning Commission is we don't want any more of those buildings. And that's, you can do
Look,
that.
the reality is if the city wants to get something done, there are ways to get it done. And the whole Lafayette Dorm is a perfect example. And yes, there was robust discussion, but in the end, they got approval, it's being built. And I think that's healthy. Now, unless you're saying we don't want to go through that process and we want to have full control, but then just come out front and say that. Don't disguise it as, oh, this is a formatting change, we're trying to clean it up.
Oh,
Because
no,
you've heard plenty of comments from established people in this community talking about their concerns of eliminating it. And I still haven't seen a solid reason for the resistance.
Well, let me ask one more question then, Chad. I really would like to hear what you thought of it. But how did the last letter that from the Planning Commission change their stance on the context sensitive design? Because
It did not.
all right, okay.
Yeah, well, and let me just say that the last letter from the Lehigh Valley Plan Commission was attached to the draft resolution that had circulated to the members. So you do have it.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything insidious by the fact that I didn't have it. I wasn't trying to say everybody got it, but I didn't get it.
Oh, no, I understand.
I don't have it in front of me. That's all. I didn't read it.
I'm just saying you do have it in case you want to.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's okay. But the most recent letter did not change the LVPC's view regarding those context sensitive design standards.
They want it in the code. Where do they want it?
They wanted it at the beginning of the ordinance.
In series, did they not? Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Well, if I can just maybe just touch for a moment on the square footage. I personally don't have any problem with a zoning amendment that permits buildings larger than 8,000 square feet. I concur that you don't want to require applicants to jump through a variance process if there has been a determination by the city that buildings of that scale are appropriate in certain areas of the city. I think the LVPC made a comment that because 8,000 square feet is the predominant building footprint downtown, to alter that significantly would really alter the character downtown. But it also recognized that that the city does need to have some additional flexibility and leeway in current development patterns. So it was for that reason that it suggested, why don't you allow up to 16,000 square feet, but do so only within the street corridor overlay district. That way you're focusing this kind of large scale development on the corridors where they're really intended to accommodate it. And Steve, I listened to your list of kind of iconic buildings or new development where the structures clearly are in excess of 8,000 square feet. And the ones that I can tick off on the top of my head, I believe are all within the street corridor overlay. There's 3rd Street, South and North 3rd Street. I don't know whether there's been a large applications for larger structures outside of the street corridor.
Police department.
Oh, okay, that's
Dutchtown Well, Dutchtown Commons is Northampton Street, so that's street corridor.
yeah.
You know, Governor Wolf Building is certainly outside of the street corridor, and it's more than 8,000 square feet.
That was an existing building, though.
I'm just saying, though.
Yeah,
from-
yeah.
from,
I
you know,
understand.
the
Well-
Larry Holmes buildings, although I understand are currently existing, I'm just saying that the downtown, even outside of the street corridor overlay, has a number of larger than 8,000 square feet buildings. Social Security building behind me.
Yeah, and just, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, at least again, my own personal view was, my objections really go to the fact that as currently proposed for special exception purposes, there is no limit at all. That under this proposal, so long as an applicant comes in and seeks a special exception, there is no footprint limit applicable.
Well, it's actually 24,000 square feet.
Okay.
For infill development only, they could go up to 24,000 square feet by special exception. And then there is a provision that parking structures could exceed the maximum building footprint. Parking structures open to the public. And with that, private developers aren't building parking structures. It's a municipal function.
Well, I guess part of the question then is going to be whether the city, whether we are happy with up to 24,000 square feet on a requested special exception where there's no criteria to say yes or no on 24,000 square feet, and no way to distinguish for approval purposes one application versus another for 24,000 square feet.
Well, you would still be able to weigh it on the impact on the neighborhood, on the facilities, or the infrastructure capacity of the location, if it could handle that size building. Those would be some criteria that are in the proposal, and the existing special exception criteria. That it's consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
Well,
as you know, all those other criteria are considered to be subjective. An applicant really doesn't have to meet a burden of showing that it meets those criteria. It'd be up to an objector to prove that they don't meet that criteria. So I guess as a practical matter, my judgment would be that if you establish those things as a special exception, allowable up to 24 or beyond, without some objective criteria to guide under what circumstances you're going to allow a developer to go to 24,000 or not, you're effectively giving them a buy on it. All they have to do is make the application, go to the zoning hearing board, and they're going to get their
well,
special exception.
it would have to be for infill development, like was approved for 56 North 3rd Street, which exceeds 16,000 square feet.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, under the ordinance as currently proposed, is there anything that would prevent a developer from knocking down 3 buildings and saying, well, now I'm gonna infill?
Well, the historic district, the historic preservation ordinance, chapter 318 would in our downtown.
Well, I don't think it prohibits it.
It does prohibit demolition without a certificate of
Oh,
appropriate.
without a certificate of, yeah, but so for zoning purposes.
And you have to meet criteria to get a COA. Well, basically, the only criteria for a demolition COA is that it's structurally unsound and at risk of falling. And in the past, at least in my experience, they've required engineering reports certifying that.
Was the Days Inn structurally unsound? Was there an engineering report that supported demolition of that site?
So they found that that building was not historically significant.
Okay.
So yes, I'm sorry. My first statement was incorrect. So I guess that would be 2 criteria. It's not historically significant and structurally unsound.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're gonna then give protection against demolition and large scale construction only to those structures which are deemed to be historically significant.
Well, what's protected under historic preservation, chapter 318.
Yeah, okay.
Well, the proposal for the West Ward was broader than that. Not the proposal, the discussion on the West Ward
Yeah, right.
was broader than that. No?
Yeah, and I mean, so there, I mean, I don't want to get into too much.
No, I don't want to get into that either.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
But it just seems to me that there are issues that relate to the character of the neighborhood, massing and scale, that properly go beyond, protection of specific historic buildings that are implicated by allowing demolition and construction of buildings up to 24,000 feet, in the downtown. I continue to think it's a mistake to do that. And I guess it's just one of these things where,
That falls under context.
Well,
no,
I do want to point out that every neighborhood does have provisions now, or with the proposal for massing and scaling, to position buildings in context with the block,
Yeah,
to
that's-
have them in line, to
Right.
provide, massing and scaling, void and mass for those larger buildings, to make them appear to be different buildings.
Well, let me ask this question, please, and then I'll stop with this thing. If we don't put these in one place in series, and we do as you're proposing, Steve, is it going to change in your mind how reasonable, and we have to assume we're dealing with reasonable people and reasonable lawyers who know the law. Is it going to change how presentations are made to us under context significance? Is it going to change anything?
I don't believe that would be the case.
So you're saying that we get all the benefit if it isn't put in one place, and because of the way it's written, the proposed draft that you've made, that we're going to have the same protections.
I believe that the proposed draft will provide the same protections and objective standards by which development could be equally viewed.
That's one opinion. And what I see is one person trying to drive something home when the bulk of the community is expressing concern.
Yeah.
And you originally brought this up. There were a lot of other issues that would have all kinds of ramifications for this city that when it was pointed out to you, you eventually changed. So, this is a document that's going to impact how the city evolves. And it needs to be done, I think, at a slower pace in a more organic fashion. What would be wrong, since we've already spent so much time and a lot of these issues have been done, of moving ahead And we haven't gotten to what the chairman has proposed as a resolution to address a lot of these issues, one of which is to maintain the context-sensitive design. What would be the problem of going ahead and getting this done? And then if down the road you found that there are major issues we got to address, we can handle it at that point. I mean,
I
you know,
never,
we're dragging this thing out now. It's 5, 6 meetings and there's still no meeting of the minds. And
I'm not against the chairman's proposed resolution.
Well, let's hear it. I
all
haven't
right,
heard.
let's get into that then.
Ooh, okay.
Well, no, I didn't ask. Somebody said you got a proposal. I'd like to hear it.
Okay, so I will read the entire thing. It is,
6 pages.
yeah, 6 pages.
Well,
So I'll,
You could maybe skip the whereas part.
yeah, I'll save 1 page that way. All right, so I'll do that. We'll just get right to it. So what I proposed is a resolution which says that, and I'll start, now therefore be it resolved by the Planning Commission of the City of Easton, of Fairfield County, Pennsylvania, to recommend to Easton City Council that the proposed amendments of Chapter 595, the zoning code, and Chapter 520, Saldo, of the codified ordinances of the City of Easton, Pennsylvania, contained herein be adopted, subject, however, to the following proposed modifications thereto, and to be further modified in consideration of the following comments. All right, Chapter 595 zoning code, page 48, 595-11D, and this is all version of February 17th, 2020. The new provision for district design standards. The second provision, quote, design shall be evaluated, unquote, should be reworded to establish legal obligations rather than creating vague and precatory language. It should read, quote, design shall be evaluated for and shall provide for 1, promotion of adaptive reuse and redevelopment of buildings, strengthening historic main streets and cultural centers, revitalization of walkable historic centers. 2, encouragement of investment in commercial and residential areas, redevelopment of our neighborhoods and business districts. 3, protection of historic and other assets from potential threats. 4, advancement of quality, sustainable design and construction that has the capacity for future reuse. 5, the matching of development intensity with sustainable infrastructure capacity, end quote. The next item, page 77, 595-17B1, and page 80, 595-17D1. The river and corridor district increase in impervious surface. The amendment proposes a district-wide increase maximum impervious surface ratio from 15% to 40% in the river corridor and other green areas district. This proposed amendment is contrary to the recommendations of the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission that the existing impervious surface limitations be retained. While the staff's rationale for this change is that some of the areas within the district are already developed, such existing impervious surface areas can be acknowledged or grandfathered without a general increase in allowable impervious surface throughout the district. Modifications to the impervious surface limitations should be justified only by showing by design professional that increased stormwater will be managed without adverse impacts on infrastructure or water quality, and that repairing buffer requirements will adequately protect stream quality. The next item, page 86, 595-18D2, INS1, increase in impervious surface. The amendment proposes an increase of maximum impervious surface ratio from 50%, the current ordinance, to 65%. While the 65% limit represents a compromise from the prior proposed increase to 75%, we believe the modifications to the existing maximum impervious surface ratio should be justified only by a showing by a design professional that increased stormwater will be managed without adverse impacts to infrastructure or water quality. Next item, page 99, 595-20 F8, the downtown building footprint increase from 8,000 square feet to 16,000 square feet, and unlimited footprint for infill development considered in conjunction a proposed deletion of important context-sensitive design standards. The amendment proposes to double the allowable building footprint downtown from 8,000 square feet to 16,000 square feet, and to allow unlimited, that is greater than 16,000 square feet, building footprints downtown for infill development. And I quote, the maximum building footprint in the DD or downtown district shall be 16,000 square feet. Then A, infill development may exceed 16,000 square feet by special exception, end quote. This proposed amendment is contrary to the recommendations of the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, which finds it, quote, incompatible with the existing historic structure and character of the area, end quote. The amendment ostensibly represents a compromise from a prior proposal to allow a maximum building footprint of 24,000 square feet. However, because the entire downtown is fully developed, the only additional development would be infill. We recommend against allowing an unlimited building footprint for infill development even by special exception, because it would authorize fundamental departures from historic downtown building topology and pattern. Moreover, the proposed amendments do not establish any criteria for the zoning hearing board or the planning commission to apply to these special exceptions. Without such criteria for approval or denial, the zoning hearing board and planning commission have no objective basis for decision making. The implications of this proposed change can only be fully understood when considered in conjunction with the proposed deletion of numerous existing context-sensitive design standards. Then at this point, I drop a footnote and I say, while some context-sensitive design standards have been moved into the text of the specific zoning district standards, many have been simply deleted. These deletions from the existing ordinance include the following, and I'm not going to read them all, but the sections that have been deleted, and in my judgment, do not appear to be actually then imported into other sections in the text of the ordinance in the specific districts, include the design sensitive standards of 595-212 building type and sizes, 595-217 lot width and side yard setbacks, 595-218 sidewalks and crosswalks, 595-219 street trees and landscaping, 595-220-221 uses, 595-222 lot size, 595-223 lot and building coverage. So the point is that the implications of the change in building footprint can only be understood when considered when looking at how many of these context-sensitive design standards are proposed for deletion rather than incorporation in other parts of the ordinance. The combined effect of these changes would be to allow lot consolidation to create lots as large as the 16,000 square feet building footprint throughout the downtown zoning district of unvarying size, with mixed-use buildings of maximum allowable height of 100 to 110 feet. This would destroy the existing downtown neighborhood structure and character. Increasing development interest in downtown Easton is likely to result in multiple proposals of this scale in building topology. While structures of such bulk and height have very recently been allowed, they've been proposed and accepted only as infill development, primarily on city-owned property, and thus within city control. Development pressure to create such structures is likely to increase, and therefore to create pressure for demolition within the existing fabric downtown. Allowing demolition to create infill opportunities for development unlimited by ordinance exacerbates the risk of damage or destruction of existing neighborhood character and fabric. The existing context-sensitive design standard, which reads, smaller footprint mixed-use buildings are intended to continue in the downtown, unquote, requires careful reevaluation and should not be simply discarded. It should be tailored to permit infill development of larger scale, but not permit the demolition of existing buildings to create infill opportunities. This requires a careful balancing of the preservation of the existing historic fabric with accommodation of growth. The proposed amendments do not reflect the required careful balance. While the city also has a local historic district ordinance, that ordinance would not address the lot consolidation and building footprint issues. And the Historic District Commission should not have to bear this kind of development pressure without the assistance of zoning controls. In addition, the proposed zoning amendments, ordinance amendments, remove the context-sensitive design standard that encouraged adaptive reuse of existing buildings. It read, existing vacant buildings shall be adaptively reused for a variety of uses. And the proposal removes language that had required new buildings to be sized to facilitate reuse and adaptive reuse. Quote, buildings shall be sized to allow for reuse and adaptive reuse, unquote. The elimination of these requirements represents a shift in longstanding policy. The precatory language in the new proposed section 595.11d, district design standards, which starts off with design shall be evaluated for promotion of adaptive reuse, is no substitute for binding design standards. The new policy represented by these proposed amendments discourages adaptive reuse, encourages demolition of existing structures, and encourages new construction at white elephant scales. The city's historic preservation ordinance code chapter 318, section 318-9 requires that the zoning code amendments, quote, be compatible with the purposes and objectives of the, unquote, historic preservation ordinance. Indeed, the editor's note to this section in the historic preservation ordinance explicitly refers to section 595-224 context-sensitive design standards. The proposed amendments with respect to building footprint and the deletion of context-sensitive design standards are not compatible with code chapter 318. While the city needs to accommodate some growth and new development, which will require modification of the zoning ordinance, you should do so with the guidance of an AICP certified planning professional with experience in harmonizing preservation of existing historic urban fabric with new development.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to just interject. You read the 7 section titles of the design standards that were being eliminated and not duplicated in each of the specific neighborhoods. But when you actually look at the items, there are close to 40 items which are being deleted that you did not read. I just wanted to inject that point.
Yeah, all I did is read the section number. Next item, page 120, 595-25E, design standards for the street corridor overlay district. The revised design standards for the street corridor overlay district ostensibly preserve the existing maximum building footprint limit of 8,000 square feet, but allow exceedances of that limit by special exception. The proposed revision does not establish any separate limit for such a special exception and therefore allows unlimited building footprints by special exceptions. This is contrary to the recommendations of the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, which recommended building footprints of up to 16,000 square feet within the street corridor overlay district, with special exceptions for larger building footprints only in very limited cases. Moreover, the proposed amendments do not establish any objective criteria for the zoning hearing board or the planning commission to apply to these special exceptions. Without such criteria for approval or denial, the zoning hearing board and planning commission have no objective basis for decision making. Another standard, 595-25E8, which is applicable to, quote, commercial buildings, unquote, in the street corridor overlay district, provides that with a limited geographic area, that is College Hill, South Side, and Westwood districts, except on Northampton Street and Cattell Street, each non-residential use in a mixed-use building shall have a maximum floor area of 6,000 square feet. The amendments should, but do not establish reasonable maximum building footprint limits applicable to residential uses in the street corridor overlay district. Next item, page 141, 595-32A, supplemental standards for multifamily dwellings. And this is just parenthetically, this is the one that Steve has provided the commission with a new proposed table, which would establish supplemental standards for multifamily dwellings. So this comment may be addressed by what Steve gave us today, but I'll nevertheless go ahead and read it. Subsection 2 deletes the requirement that the principal building shall comply with the required yards, height, and impervious surface of the designated zoning district and block class. However, there do not appear to be dimensional standards in the dimensional standards table for multifamily dwellings in the respective zoning districts. And the supplemental standards establish those standards. So the ordinance should establish appropriate dimensional standards for multi-family dwellings. Again, as Steve's most recent email to us would create. Next item, page 161, 595-33F2, parking management plan. The LVPC has commended the city's proposed inclusion of a parking management plan option to provide flexibility in managing parking supply and demand. We also commend the addition of a provision requiring the applicant to pay the city costs for a parking consultant to evaluate and approve the parking management plan. However, the proposed amendment refers to Code Section 585-31G for the relevant fees for such reviews, and this code section has not yet been amended to provide for such fees. Code Section 585.31G should be amended contemporaneously with these amendments to avoid a regulatory gap. And then last but not least, pages 187 to 195 of the ordinance, of the proposed ordinance, proposed deletion of context-sensitive design standards. We do not recommend the removal of a number of the context-sensitive design standards and agree with the comments of the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission in its prior review letter dating January 28, 2020, that the standards should be strengthened and moved to the front of the zoning code to emphasize their overarching significance. Careful adjustment of the standards to accommodate new development is appropriate and should be undertaken with certified planning expertise with standards creating experience in historic districts. In general, the context-sensitive design standards set forth in footnote 1 of this resolution, which I've already alluded to, should be retained. So that was my effort to at least express my views about the proposed amendments. And
Steve, that is obviously in detail, much broader and in much more detail and more thorough than what I was suggesting, but it has the same end result on the context design standards. Are you happy with that, with Chot's proposal?
So I do have a few comments, and again, I certainly appreciate all the work Chot does. He's always goes above and beyond for the Planning Commission and every board he serves on. So that's definitely appreciated and not unnoticed. But I will say, so the first point, 595-214, building sizes and types. The first three bullets are all legislative intent. So they're not enforceable standards. They're just intent. And it talks about smaller footprint for mixed-use buildings are intended to continue into downtown. Smaller footprint, two-story and three-story buildings are intended to continue in adjoining neighborhoods. So, and the third one, a diversity of building types characterizes the downtown. And then there's, he lists 3 design standards, which are subjective. Buildings shall be sized to allow for reuse and adaptive reuse. So that's relatively subjective, but what I did to accommodate that concern in 595-11D, I certainly support Schott's recommendation to strengthen that by making it a shall provide for, which would be promotion of the adaptive reuse and redevelopment of buildings, and then advancement of quality, sustainable design and construction that has the capacity for future reuse. So new buildings shall be designed to be compatible in size and type with normative buildings on the same block. Again, that's relatively subjective because it doesn't provide parameters, but the zoning district's design standards have had that language added to provide for design standards for large mass buildings that are greater than 40 feet in width. So my view is that it was addressed. Vertical mixed-use buildings shall be maintained and created in downtown. Again, perhaps that's more objective, but it still doesn't provide a standard other than saying that the building should be vertical and mixed use in the downtown. But that's, I believe, already in the downtown zoning district design standards. Lot width and side yard setbacks, again, legislative intent, not enforceable, or it's not a standard. And then the 3 standards listed, the first 2 emulate existing normative lot widths on the block. And then the next one is lot widths for new and infill development shall be varied to create diversity. So just in that same section, it almost seems like they conflict. They should be normative or diverse. Then the third one says side yard setback shall be minimum of 5 feet outside of the downtown. So that may be the only objective standard that is listed there, but it's already considered and added in the dimensional criteria tables. Sidewalks and crosswalks, that's regulated in the SALDO and also in chapter 515 of the city code. 219 street trees and landscaping is in the SALDO. And then we also have a tree ordinance. Sorry, I just don't remember the section number off the top of my head. 595-221 uses. So uses are listed in each zoning district. And the whole intent by listing them in each zoning district is to meet those requirements that are listed, which are all subjective. But you list permitted and special exception uses in each district to develop the neighborhoods the way the zoning ordinance sees fit. So I don't know how this would even be applicable if someone presents a land development with a use that is permitted in a zoning district. Even if it's a special exception, I'm not sure how this section would even have any weight. Then you go to lot sizes. It says lot size is intended to vary throughout the city, which seems to conflict with the prior section that talks about lot dimensions. And then also has the same requirements that they should generally emulate existing lot sizes. And then it says in the next section, they shall vary depending on the block class. So again, lot sizes are listed in dimensional criteria tables anyway. Lot and building coverage also in dimensional criteria. That's where you get your percentages of lot coverage. First 2 items listed are legislative intent, again, which is just the intent of the ordinance and not an enforceable standard. So that actually covered all those items, which is why I believe that with those sections in 595-11D to provide for the sustainable construction, the adaptive reuse, the preservation of historic and other assets, and then providing those dimensional criteria, design standards, permitted and special exception uses, all specifically listed in those districts. You are now provided with objective standards with still criteria for you to require applicants to prove to you that it's meeting those standards for adaptive reuse and infill development, meeting infrastructure capacity. And that's just context sensitive design. The second item, which was River Corridor District, increase in impervious surface. So again, the entire code conflicts on that. It says permitted uses could cover 15%, special exception uses could cover 30%. Then the table in the existing code says 40%, and then the existing context sensitive design says 40%. So it's a number of conflicts. INS1, increase in impervious surface. The entire reason behind changing standards for INS1 was for them which is the college campus. INS1 is the college campus. Is so the college develops on its campus and no longer pushes out into the College Hill neighborhood. For a long time, we heard that they should develop on campus. They should use the land they have. Tom Jones, I believe, had said that they should go west, which is down Bushkill Drive, which was part of the goal with this, was to accommodate the neighborhood concerns of the college creeping out on College Hill. So we believe this ordinance, or this proposed ordinance, helps address that concerns, confines the college to their property, and funnels them down Bushkill Drive, which has been suggested a number of times when the College Hill Institutional 1 transition zone was going through changes. We covered the downtown building footprint concerns with the 8,000, 16,000, and 24,000 square feet. We talked about the supplemental standards for multifamily dwellings, and that oversight had occurred because multifamily dwellings are not a permitted use in any zoning district except for the street corridor overlay. So the street corridor overlay refers back to the individual zoning districts in which that overlay occurs for that dimensional criteria, which is where that proposed table I had sent earlier comes in to hopefully address that item. With regard to the parking management plan, yes, we recognize that 280, our fee schedule would have to be revised. And that would be brought to council through the normal ordinance process because our fee chapter is an ordinance. And the last item regarding context sensitive design standards, I feel I'd gone over.
So Steve, if I may, I think one of the problems I see is before the chairman read what he is proposing as a resolution that could come to a vote and get this thing done, you had stated to all of us that you have no problems with it and that you would accept it. And now you've just spent 10 minutes countering everything that was raised. And I would reaffirm what Mr. Shipman said, because I was at that meeting, an earlier meeting, when you stated to the general public and to the commission that you would put those standards back in as originally written. And you didn't do it. And you've now raised more reasons for why you shouldn't do it. And this is why this thing drags on.
Mr. Sun, with all due respect, I don't think I ever agreed to put the context sensitive design standards as they're currently written back in the code the way they were. I said,
Well, then you're not a talker than I think you are, because the impression to everybody, was certainly to Mr. Shipman, to me, there may be other people who would state the same thing, was that you did agree.
so
Now you're saying no.
Well, the question I asked you, do you have any problem with them being in one place and in series? And you said no. Clearly.
What I said is it doesn't make it. So I don't think my direct answer was no. What I believe my intent and answer was that it wouldn't change the current code whether you
Alright.
put them
Alright,
where they are now or put them in the front. But it doesn't change the underlying problem that there's conflicts, and having design standards outside of the zoning district, the ordinance more challenging for practitioners and users of the code, public, developers, or otherwise, to read and understand.
But
The-
nobody gave
The
you, nobody,
reason- the
man,
reason-
nobody gave you a mandate to eliminate all subjective things. And, you know, we've lived with it for decades and it's worked. So I can't have you say, well, it's subjective, therefore it's got to be changed.
with
And I
all due
mean, yeah, but let me be more current. The more current is 10 minutes ago. And 10 minutes ago, you clearly stated, because it's being recorded, that you had no problem with the chairman's resolution of a proposal, which was sent out to all the members, including you, which you read.
Mr. Sun, just
yeah.
because I don't have a problem with it or any of the decisions of the planning commission does not mean that I have an alternate view. I certainly, as evidenced by my work on this ordinance, is
No,
that I
you
have a
do.
different-
You
and
stated your-
if you would, please just let me finish speaking.
Yeah, let's not talk over each other.
So, again, I agree, or I appreciate all the work Mr. Elliott had put into this ordinance, or this resolution. He has pored over it numerous times, and I can't even imagine the hours he had put in for no compensation. But, and I don't have a problem with the commission passing this resolution because that's your prerogative. But I still am arguing my point of a usable ordinance that is clear, subjective,
know.
easy to enforce.
You made your point numerous times to various people. The Lehigh Valley Planning Commission didn't agree with you. There are several members of the Planning Commission that doesn't agree with you, and there are members in the community that doesn't agree with you. So how long do you want to beat this thing over the head to keep stating your view? We know what your view is. We've heard it.
Well, in fairness, I mean, I just read a lengthy, set of viewpoints. And I think staff is certainly entitled to respond, the author of the proposed amendments, and I think he's entitled to respond to it.
Well, there's no question about that. He's entitled to respond. But I think Bob's right. I mean, I don't know how we move. I think we have to move forward. We have to get this thing done. It's up to us, I think.
Yeah. Well, all right. So I would like to respond to at least a couple of items that Steve raised.
Mhm.
So just the first general matter is the comment about the reference to legislative intent. I mean, clearly legislative intent is just that, and it's not uncommon. In fact, it's almost commonplace to have expressions of legislative intent in an ordinance or in a statute so that the reader understands what the intent is. It provides context, provides an interpreter with an understanding of the rationale behind it. So the fact that it's a statement of legislative intent and not, quote, a binding standard, sure, but it's important, I think, particularly in something like this, to provide that legislative intent as an aid to the interpreter. So far as some of these things being subjective, you've identified a couple of them, and I'll just point out maybe the one or two that I have kind of focus on, which is this issue of buildings being sized for reuse. You identified this design standard in 595-214, quote, buildings shall be sized to allow for reuse and adaptive reuse as being vague. But your proposal that is intended to address that, in fact, is even more subjective. In your proposed design standards in 595-11, your original proposal was design shall be evaluated for promotion of adaptive reuse. Well, that's almost completely subjective and incapable of being applied. I proposed adding the phrase "shall provide for," so there's at least some indicia of a legally binding, standard. But even that is very different and far less and far more subjective than a standard which says that buildings shall be sized to allow for reuse and adaptive reuse. There may be subjectivity there, but it's less subjectivity than your ultimate proposal. The same is with respect to the next one. New buildings shall be designed to be compatible in size and type of normative buildings on the same block. Well, that's not really subjective. I mean, it's subjective to a point, but certainly no more subjective than your list of the design, evaluated for advancement of quality, sustainable design, and that's also far more vague and subjective than the standard which I just read. So I'm not really convinced by the subjectivity argument. In some cases, you've referred to the an extensible conflict between certain provisions. For example, let me try to find this here. Lot widths. Lot widths shall emulate existing normative lot widths on a block. The next one is lot widths for new and infill development shall be varied to create diversity. Well, that's not really, those two don't contradict each other. They complement each other. They're intended to address somewhat different scales and different questions. They both talk about lot widths, and one says emulate existing, other one says varied. But that doesn't mean that they're contradictory, and I don't think that they are. I think that's also true with at least one or two other points where you say that you believe that they contradict each other, but I don't read them that way. Lot sizes shall generally emulate existing lot sizes in each character zone and zoning district to maintain consistency of neighborhood structure. While it is the case that the ordinance does establish some objective numerical criteria for lot sizes, as a general matter, those are minimum lot sizes to accommodate certain uses, and that really doesn't get at the standard, which is saying that if you're going to create new lot sizes, you really should emulate existing lot sizes on the within the zoning district or the character zone, so that you don't have sort of a mishmash of different widely varying and sort of distorting levels of lot sizes. So just as a very general matter, these design standards have been in place for a long time. There is certainly some level of subjectivity involved. It's no less subjective than some of the alternate proposal which you've included in the amendments. They have worked to maintain the neighborhoods of a character and a scale that I think people have generally been happy with, and I think has facilitated the city's development up to this point. I've said a couple times, and I'll say it again, that it's not like some of these don't need to be examined with an eye that we are now moving into a new development phase, and that some of these things may require some further development, adjustment, and tailoring. But that's what it requires: adjustment and tailoring with an eye to the kind of development which we are seeing, which we want to encourage. And I just get the sense that by simply eliminating these, we wind up eliminating the kind of the regulatory fabric which has allowed us to keep the downtown preserved, avoid really distorting massive large-scale development. And we're already kind of seeing seeing the envelope being pushed there. There are people who have been quite unhappy about the kind of bulk and scale of some of these buildings that have been proposed, and the HDC, I know, has been unhappy with some of it, but they've kind of stuck in a sense with what they have in terms of regulatory authority. So my view continues to be, and it's reflected by the kind of the entirety of what I've said here, that the cumulative nature of the changes allows too much distortion and alteration of fabric and character that I think we want to keep. So I think that's the bottom line. I don't know that I have anything else about it. I mean, I've expressed my views in detail in this, 5-page document. If there are, if there are specific, specific factual mistakes that I've made, if I failed to identify, a square footage limit, some of the ones you mentioned, then I think I'd be happy to, raise that in a communication to City Council. And I think it's, I think it's incumbent really for folks to make their views known to City Council, because ultimately that's who's going to make the decision here. We're just recommending something, whatever we decide to
I'd like to
recommend.
hear from I'd like to hear from the public. We have some people here, do we not?
Sure, we certainly do. I have 27 participants.
Oh, wow.
Are we finished with comment from the group?
I don't have anything else. Does anyone else have anything else from the
Yes,
committee?
yeah, I would like to say a couple things. First, that I appreciate the chairman's reading through all of that. I think obviously you've done a great deal of work, and I really want to express my appreciation for that. I also want to appreciate the staff's work, and Steve and the other staff members. The LVPC put out documents to us, and I think largely those were incorporated, although some elements perhaps not, but I don't think that invalidates the effort by the staff to address those ideas. And certainly we're going to hear the public comments, so I'm anxious to hear that. But I just would like to say that, again, I'm in agreement with the chairman's memo to a great extent, and I think you summed it up well at the end by saying that these context design standards have served us well over time, but yet all the references, and I won't go back to all the specific ones, pretty much all the references that you made, and I believe others made, argued for the staff's point of view, which is to put them objectively within the district that they belong. And whether we're going to get there tonight or we're not, and we need to move forward, that's fine. But I guess I'll agree with the chairman that then these things, perhaps need to be revisited, because clearly a lot of the discussion about the concerns had to do with what's going on in the downtown, which emphasizes the point that the context is specific to the neighborhood, not to the entire city. And so these things ought to be ferreted out. Again, I don't want to get into all the specifics, but you looked for objective criteria, and when objective criteria weren't there, like on the 24,000 square feet, you wanted it to be more objective, and I think that's the point. That was the whole point of the exercise, is to try to. And if there was a mistake made there, then I think correct the mistake. I agree with you that there's been some deletions of probably some key context-sensitive design standards. But if those deletions are important, then they should be placed within the district that they're relevant to, and should be placed there. And again, if that's not the exercise that we should be in tonight, to minutely pick those things, and we need to move on, I understand that. Again, I'm new to the commission, so I understand there's others with lots more experience about where these things go. But if that's the case, I think it's certainly ripe for revisiting at a later time to make sure we're addressing the important things for each of the neighborhoods that are relevant to those neighborhoods. So thanks again for your work to help make those other points very clear.
Thank you, Dr. Green. If there's nothing else from the commission, I'm seeing nothing at the moment, let's take comments from the public. Again, I'll underscore that we've been at this quite a long time. So please keep your comments focused. Please, if you can, don't duplicate the points that have already been made in prior meetings that you've seen. And then we'll be happy to hear anything of significance that's relatively new. So I guess, Steve, you will be handling this.
Yeah, so I just would like to cover, if you are calling in on your phone, you dial *9 to raise your hand and you'll get put in the queue to speak. When your audio permissions are granted, you are requested to state your name and address before making your comment. If you are in on Zoom, you could raise your hand through that platform. There should be a button in the ribbon below. Currently, we have one attendee with their hand raised, and we also still have that question that came in earlier regarding these amendments. If you would like me to read it, technically that was the first one we got, or?
Yeah, I think that's fair. You get someone who made a comment first.
And then the attendees who raised their hands, it lists them in order in which that they had raised their hand. So we could go down the list in that manner as well, if you like.
Thank you, Steve. That's great.
Surely. So the first question came in from Carol Inman of 700 Hamilton Street, number 2 in Easton. The statement is, in reference to the decrease in requirements for pervious surfaces, the placement of warehouses in river corridor, and the decreased setback requirements for buildings adjacent to waterways, I would like to ask a question. So although I'm not sure if Carol is still on, it does not appear that that's the case. I could address the warehouses in river corridors has been taken out. The decreased setback was changed. If it's the one in the INS1 along the Bushkill, which was a concern, and that was addressed. I imagine the decrease in requirements for pervious surfaces is also in reference to the river corridor, where we have talked about at length, where there's a couple of provisions in the current code. We, as a staff, decided to stick it at 40%, as is in the table, and context-sensitive design, but the actual section for river corridor has 15% for permitted and 30% for special exception. So
I hope that answered the concern.
So the first one is Kurt Ely. So Kurt, you can now unmute your computer and please state your name and address.
Yes, my name is Kurt Ely. I live at 305 West Monroe Street in Easton. First of all, I just want to say that I'm personally very proud of our current code. Having said that, however, I've always felt that it was difficult to navigate. So I really do appreciate the efforts that have been made to reorder and renumber it so that it can be addressed or reviewed in a much more expeditious way. So thank you very much, Steve, for all the work you've done in that regard. However, this meeting leaves me with basically the same feeling that I've had with other meetings, and that is that much of what we have in our current code has served us well and would continue to serve us well if left in its basically in its current form. I'd point out that zoning variances that were alluded to earlier take place with our zoning hearing board, and that if we're having a lot of zoning variances occur, I believe that in the vast majority of those cases, it's because the zoning hearing board has not been following the rules that you indicated, Steve, earlier in this meeting. They're part of the municipality's planning code. And unfortunately, our zoning hearing board does not tend to follow those rules. If they did, there'd be many, many fewer variances granted. My opinion. Also, I'd like to say that our context-sensitive design standards, provided as they are provided in our current code, not only enumerate them in the beginning, but certain nuances of design standard are provided for each of our neighborhoods. So we accomplish both purposes under our current code. And I, again, would like to see that process continue. I think it's important that anyone coming to our code be able to see what our design standards are and see what we expect of those who develop within our city. And then as they look to each individual neighborhood, because each neighborhood is different, they can find specific additional design standards that apply to those neighborhoods. I think that makes sense. Again, a lot of time and effort went into the creation of our current code. I'm very proud of it. I appreciate it being there. The other point I'd like to make is that zoning is zoning, and the Historic District Commission and how they handle their responsibilities within the law are two entirely different matters. And I really don't appreciate saying that, well, it'll be left up to the Historic District Commission then to determine. I believe that the zoning code needs to be clear for each of our districts. And I believe that it needs to be abided by our zoning hearing board. And if that happens, then what we want for city development will occur in our city. I guess the last point that I would make is that according to the municipality's planning code of Pennsylvania, our zoning code is supposed to follow the comprehensive plan. In fact, it says that if it does not, that the zoning code needs to be adjusted to fit the plan, not the other way around. Not that the comprehensive plan is supposed to be changed to accommodate the zoning, but that our zoning code should follow the comprehensive plan. I believe a lot of what's been talked about in regard to building size and footprint does not follow our comprehensive plan, especially not in general, but also specifically within our downtown district. I'm very concerned about our code allowing for 24,000, what was it? How many, we went from 8,000 square feet to 16,000 square feet. And now we're talking about 24,000 square feet as a maximum for special exception. I think that that's too large. I really, really do. I much appreciated what was read by Chairman Elliott. I so appreciate all his work. As Steve, I do appreciate all the work that you've put in as well. And I really hope that at the end of the day, we come up with something that adheres to the guidance and direction that was provided by the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission. I believe that much of Mr. Elliott's work gets us much closer to that. And that pretty much would summarize my concerns and comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurt. Were we just going to go through line, or should
I think just take them in order that they've been received in terms of people raising.
Oh, yeah, I just didn't know. I had I guess really one comment, but that could wait. Okay. All right, so next up is Elizabeth Colley. And, oh, hold on.
I think you got me instead. This is Kevin Daney.
My apologies. Yeah, the names got reordered on me. So if Elizabeth doesn't mind, or if it's okay to go with Kevin at this time.
Sure.
I apologize, Elizabeth.
Okay, sorry about that, Elizabeth. Kevin Daney, 526 Mikesell Street. And I can be very brief because I submitted a letter to Chairman Elliott and the members of the Planning Commission on March 8th. So I'll move the admission of that letter into the record and dispense with going through the various arguments that I made in there. But in a nutshell, I pick up where Mr. Ely left off, that legally there are lots of substantive changes that are inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. And from a policy point of view, or policies being made by the administration here, and it's substantive and it affects the residents. So I'm glad to hear that some changes are being proposed in this that protect the residents from development. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
All right. And now we have Elizabeth Colley.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth, Mary Liz Colley. I live at 100 Pennsylvania Avenue in Easton. I just have a few comments. One is that I understand that you all want to move forward. I hope you do it with, with the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission suggestions in mind. Then just in passing, a very long time ago, I worked in Baltimore on city planning. And at that time, there was something called citizen participation, that everything we did had to go out to the residents and we needed to get their input. I don't know of anything like that happened right now. I know that when I first got interested in this and I went to wanted to find out more about it in January, just before your January meeting, I couldn't find anything. I went to the city website and thinking there would be something there, and all I got was this page is not activated. And then I looked through, I searched the Morning Call, I searched the Express and could find nothing. Now I know that Chairman Elliott said it was out, people could get it, but I couldn't. So I would hope in the future that maybe you bring in some residents into the planning process. I don't think you would have this outrage among people on Easton and College Hill about mid-rise apartment buildings going up in our neighborhood. I think that there would be more support for you there. The other thing that troubles me a whole lot is the idea of warehouses on our waterfront or near the waterfront. I don't think that this Lehigh Valley needs any more warehouses. I think it's causing congestion and gridlock on our roads. And I also think it's going to contribute to air pollution very strongly. And finally, we moved here in 1972. And at that time, we lived in Baltimore for a while, and Baltimore had put urban renewal way back, gotten rid of it way back as a solution. We moved here, and South 3rd Street was a wasteland on North 3rd, where between Ferry Street and the river, that whole Lebanese community had been destroyed. A month before we moved here, the Boyd Theater was demolished on North 3rd Street. That's almost 50 years ago. The Boyd Theater lot has been empty for almost half a century. I'm really hoping that you take this slowly and make sure that what you are handing over to the city council is what you want for our generation and for generations to come. Because I fear that decisions can be made that will be regretted in a year or in 50 years, because that's what I've seen for cities in general. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. There are no other hands raised at this time. Although Mr. Daniels is still raised, I'm not sure if he intends to talk again or not. But Mr. Representative Freeman had just raised his hand, so I'll move him on. There you are.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Freeman, State Representative. I live at 711 Burke Street in Easton. I appreciate the thoughtful words that have been offered this evening, and I particularly appreciate Chairman Elliott's proposed resolution. I think it moves more in the right direction as to what should be done. I've spoken before at the commission meeting, so I won't belabor my points. But my chief concern is with the deletion of the current context-sensitive design standard. Throughout the various drafts that have been put forward, they have deleted the design standards and they've incompletely placed separate items of them in various zones, but still eliminated key elements that should have been kept. I believe Mr. Sun noted 40 points that were deleted. The context-sensitive design standards set the tone of our form-based zoning code, and they ensure that development will occur in such a way as to be compatible with and reflect the wonderful look and feel that we have here in our community. Context-sensitive design standards strengthen the hand of the city in guiding development, and I think that's what we want to do. A lot of development prior to the current pandemic was coming our way, and it was going to drastically change the character of our town, particularly the downtown. Context-sensitive design standards, if strengthened, can help strengthen the hand of the city in preserving what we have here, which is a wonderful community. So I urge that the context-sensitive design standards of Article 35 be left intact as they are in the current ordinance in the one that's being proposed. Left intact, strengthened, and moved forward in the document. All of these were suggested twice by the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, and twice have not been complied with. I think their guidance is appropriate. I think it would serve the city well. And so I urge the retention of the context-sensitive design standards, strengthening where appropriate, and moving them forward in the document. The substitute design standards that are presently in the draft, in my opinion, are too brief, lacking in context, and are overly vague. It does not reflect the recommendations of the Lehigh Valley. And that's why we should retain the context-sensitive design standards. I think one of the other elements that I'd like to talk to briefly about in regard to that is that the context-sensitive design standards do give clear guidance. I know that there was a concern raised by Mr. Narowski about legislative intent not being enforceable. Well, it gives a clearer picture to the developer of what is intended. That is very helpful in trying to guide development as it occurs in our community. And I would note that one of the things that probably the department should look at doing, following through on, is what was intended when we adopted the current zoning ordinance. And that was that a manual of written design and graphic design guidelines was to be created. And that would serve to help guide developers as to what we were meaning when we talked about context-sensitive design standards. That never happened. And I think that would be a very worthwhile exercise to pursue in order to strengthen the hand of the context-sensitive design standards and give them greater meaning. Finally, I do share the concerns raised by Chairman Elliott regarding the expansion of the maximum square footage to 16,000. And I understand there are some buildings that exist already, most of them pre-zoning buildings in our downtown to that extent. But I really think if we allow the massive scale of a maximum square footage of 16,000, we are going to dramatically alter the character of our community and of our downtown. Our downtown is a magnet for people. They come down because it's a very enjoyable environment in which to be, whether it's at the farmer's market, the indoor public market, at our various festivals. It has context, it has history. We want to preserve that. And by allowing the kind of large scale development to occur, we are in effect going to create a private developer urban renewal program that very well could destroy many, many buildings and the loss of historic buildings at that, and destroy our sense of place. So please, I urge you to retain the context-sensitive design standards, strengthen them, move them forward in the document, They deserve to be there to guide and to be the first thing you see practically when you look at our zoning ordinance. And to also reduce the proposed square footage maximum back to 8,000 as was proposed by the Joint Planning Commission, the Lehigh Valley Joint Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. So we currently don't have any other hands raised. If anyone else would like to speak, you could raise your hand, or if you're on your phone, dial *9.
All right, we'll give an opportunity for any last people to offer comments if they wish. We'll give that a little bit of time. But one would think that by now
Everything has been
we would have seen something. All right, so we've heard from the public. Are there any other comments or dialogue from the commissioners themselves before I entertain a motion? All right, if not, we have before us a staff resolution by which the commission would recommend to City Council that the zoning amendments proposed by the staff be adopted in toto. I have offered an alternate possible resolution. I'll entertain a motion on either one of those or on any other resolution.
I suspect that,
Item that a member cares to make.
I think we should wait for Mr. Sun.
Oh, he's on. He just turned off his camera.
Oh, all right, okay.
Ron, I will turn my camera back on, sorry.
We missed a beautiful face.
The motion that I'm willing to make a motion, but I have a question first. The motion, Mr. Chairman, that you read concluded with a recommendation that the context design standards as disclosed or as commented upon by the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission as to placement and content be followed. Am I correct? That the concluding portion of your draft resolution.
It provides that we agree with the comments of the Planning Commission in the review letter dated January 28th, that the standards should be strengthened and moved to the front of the zoning code and emphasize their importance.
I would move the adoption of that resolution that you read. Are we going to have minutes of this meeting? Is somebody taking notes?
Yeah.
All right.
It's being recorded, and I'm sure Steve,
All
the yeoman's job of.
Yeah. No, I understand that. I would.
You're not going to be verbatim, though.
Good. All right, so
I never say the same thing twice in succession. I don't think. I would move the adoption of that resolution. I don't know whether it's a counter resolution, but it's the resolution that you read and not the resolution proposed to us by our staff.
okay.
Can I jump in?
Is there a second?
So I have a question.
Yes.
What does it mean by it when we adopt this resolution as far as the overall, are we sending this to City Council? What is
Yes.
happening?
Yeah, so our action is only to offer a recommendation to City Council. And the recommendation that is contained in the resolution that I proposed is to adopt the proposed amendments subject to the entire list of items which I've identified as concerns, comments, and objections.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so with that clarification, is there a second on that motion?
I'll second it. For that.
Do it all the time, Bob.
We'll give Mr. Sun this one.
We give Mr. Sun that one.
All right, so any other discussion? All right. I will call a roll call vote on that motion. Mr. Shipman,
Yes to the motion.
Mr. Heilman,
Yes to the motion.
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Mr. Sun,
Yes.
Dr. Green.
Yes.
All right, and my vote is also yes. All right, so that concludes our action on the proposed zoning amendments as presented to us. As I've indicated, there's no update from the Environmental Advisory Council because we did not meet. So that is the end of our agenda for this evening. I don't know what the status is of how the next meeting will be conducted. I don't know whether the county will be in a green zone by then, or whether we'll be still subject to some social distancing requirements. But if the meeting is held as ordinary, it will be held as ordinary. If not, then the change in that will be noticed appropriately pursuant to the new public notice requirements. Anything else?
I'd like to say that first of all, this went smoother than I thought it was going to be. So if we're stuck with this, I think it can work, certainly. The second point is I'd like to welcome Dr. Green to the commission. And I'm sorry that the first time we're having a chance to interact is virtually, but welcome to the commission, and it's great to have you on board.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
It's
I
almost like a trust.
concur with those comments. All right, well, there's nothing else.
I just want to reiterate how much I appreciate all of the work the commission has put into this. Well, all of the work, but I certainly understand all of the extracurricular work involved with reviewing this throughout the process and the discussions and so forth. So thank you all for that work.
Thank you, Steve, and for your work as well. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, we're adjourned. I guess we can leave the meeting. Thank you all very much, and thank you to members of the public who have participated.
I agree with that. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care,
Good
everyone.
night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.